All right, Brian, it's a moment that at least you and I have been waiting for. We get to preview our top 10 quarterbacks for the 2026 college football season. When I saw this kind of on our Excel spreadsheet that we have shared together for show topics, I got very excited that we were going to sit down and break this down because you and I have been talking for quite some time that, look, bro, this is going to be an exceptional year. It's gearing up to be an exceptional year of quarterback play in college football, which fed into the overall difficulty of making this ranking. Now, I don't know if they're all going to come out in the 2027 NFL draft, but the list of potential prospects is insane for what's been going on this year in college football. Some are returning home to their new places like CJ Carr, Dante Moore, Julian Sain, Arch Manning. Then there's others on this list like, Sam Levitt, Brendan Sorsby, guys like that are going into new spots. But very interested to see our list here and how they're going to unfold. But Brian, before we dive into it, I think it's worth noting what type of year we believe that this is going to be in college football for quarterbacks.
It's a loaded year at quarterback. And some of them are big-time draft prospects. Some of them are not. Some of them are just really good college quarterbacks. And ultimately, that's what our list is going to be. Who are the best college quarterbacks in 2026? But this is important to know as a fan of college football, because you could sit there and say, well, we have CJ Carr, so we're going to run a table. Well, in theory, yeah, you could. And CJ Carr would be a big part of it. But when you have an elite quarterback in a year where there's not a lot of other elite quarterbacks, that's going to be very good for your football team. When you have an elite quarterback in a year with a lot of other elite quarterbacks, that says, okay, you can compete at quarterback with anybody. But to win it all, you're going to probably need some help in other places as well, because there's going to be some anything you can do, I can do better type of battles at quarterback this year in the regular season and postseason everywhere, not just at Notre Dame. And, like when you look at Notre Dame's schedule for, 2026, there's only, I think, one quarterback on the top 10 list that we had, but there was others that are in the conversation of, okay, this guy's not on the list, but, insert discussion of why he's right on the cusp. And in some of the guys they play are guys that would have been in the top 10 in the past. So that's the thing is, like, CJ Carr could go out there and have a great game, but they're playing a team in the playoffs who also has a big-time quarterback, and their defense and their offensive line and their receiver stepped up more than yours did. CJ put the ball on the money, but they dropped balls. I think back to, like, the 2006 Notre Dame USC game. I thought Brady Quinn played his tail off in that game. Like, Raymond McKnight had, like, 3 drop passes. The offensive line let Brady get his face beat in. The defense wasn't stepping up. If you'd have said the supporting cast played just as well for Brady as the USC supporting cast played for Matt Leinart, or actually was it Matt Leinart? Was he the quarterback in 2006? I don't think so.
Either him or John David Booty.
Yeah, I don't think it was. I think Leinart was gone after 2005. But I think you're correct. I think it was John David Booty. Yeah, it was John David Booty. But like the point is, like, was Brady Quinn better than John David Booty? Of course. So why don't he beat by 20? Because everybody else around John David Booty played a lot better than the supporting cast around Brady Quinn. So this isn't you're going to win because of CJ only. There are years where maybe that might have been true. This year isn't it. There's just too many good quarterbacks or potential good quarterbacks for you to say that. But you also need one of those guys to then compete against those other teams. Like last year, 24, look at the playoffs. Like, there's not a lot of great quarterbacks in the playoffs, which is why a Will Howard and a Riley Leonard could go do what they did. I mean, who were the semifinal quarterbacks last year, 2 years ago? It was Quinn Ewers, Riley Leonard, Will Howard, and Drew Aller. None of those guys were elite NFL draft prospects. They were darn good college quarterbacks, but they weren't. It wasn't like 18 where it was like Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, Kyler Murray, and Ian Book. Where like one of these just didn't look like the others. 2020 was like Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, and Ian Book. And then this year it was like Trinidad Chambliss, who's begging the NCAA for another year because he knows he's not going to be a high draft pick. It was Fernando Mendoza, who will be a high draft pick, but probably wouldn't have been 20 years ago. He's a really good prospect, but he's not Peyton Manning, John Elway, Andrew Luck type of prospect, right? It was Carson Beck, who's in my opinion, a day 3 draft pick. And it was Dante Moore, who ironically is the best draft prospect, in my opinion, of the semifinalists. And they got their faces beat. Why? Because he didn't play well, but the rest of the unit around him didn't play well. This year, I think, could look a lot like it has in the past. Like 18 and 19 and 20, where it's like, dude, like 19, the playoffs were Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and
Jalen Hurts.
You know what I mean? Like, it's a different breed of quarterback. I think this year is going to look a lot like that. So it's good that Notre Dame has a quarterback that's on that level. But it's good that fans understand there's a lot of dudes that are going to be really good this year. And I feel I've never felt as bad about a top 10 list as a quarterback than I've ever. And when I mean bad, is in like, dude, I may end up looking real dumb for leaving this guy off the list, but then I couldn't justify putting him in over another one of the 10 because of how deep it is. And we'll read off some of the names that we left off our lists at the end and some other up and comers, but this was a lot of fun to put together, Trev, but very difficult because of just the depth at the position this offseason or this upcoming season.
100%. This was more difficult than the way too early top 25. I mean, honestly, because there are so many different names that could have been in this top 10 list. And I'm very excited to dive into it. To give you guys a window in, I'm going 10-6. Brian's going to go 10-6, and then we'll work in that way. Also would love to see your guys' picks in there as well. Now, I know that there's going to definitely be some similarities between what we have and what the chat has, and then there's probably going to be some differences between what we have as well. But I'm excited to dive in, Brian, to what we have going on with our top 10 list. But yes, I'm very, very excited for the year that this is supposed to be at quarterback.
So here's how we'll do it. It's kind of like how we've done in the past. Trev will give his 10-6. He'll explain why. I'll give my 10-6. We can follow up questions if we want to, interject with each other. Then he'll give his 5-4. I'll give my 5-4. And then we'll release our last 3. And the reason is because once we get to 3, 2, 1, we're in the same exact order. So then we'll just kind of release those together. But Trev, because we had a lot of difference. We had the same 4 and 5, but just in a different order.
Yeah.
We had a very different 6 through 10. So let's kind of go through that, and we'll start things off with you, Trev. Let's go down into your top 10 quarterbacks, and we'll begin with a transfer in the SEC.
Yes, sir. I'm starting off my list. Number 10, Sam Leavitt. He transferred from Arizona State to LSU this past offseason. And a couple of things give me a little bit of confidence with this pick. First and foremost, we've watched Sam Leavitt perform when he's had other offensive weapons around him. But it's not necessarily so much just wide receiver play. I like the skilled talent that LSU has coming back and what they brought in from the transfer portal. You combine that with what Lane Kiffin is as an offensive mind and his ability to kind of mold transfer portal players together. I like this fit for Sam Leavitt. The biggest reason why I'm putting Sam Leavitt at 10 is for the support that he's going to finally get from the run game. He was a much different quarterback in 2025 without Cam Skattebo than he was in 2025 without him. And I think, and Brian, I know you share the same sentiment, LSU is going to have one of the best 1-2 punches at running back in the country this upcoming season if Lane Kiffin can use him the right way. Use them the right way.
6 to 7 at least, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I like what Sam Leavitt brings to the table when he has a run game to back him. But because of some like personality issues and questionable leadership traits, I can't put him any higher than this because there is a chance. I still have to see Lane Kiffin be willing to use this running back room the way that Brian Kelly and the previous regime did not. If they're able to do that, I could potentially see Sam Leavitt climbing up higher for some of the production I think that he's going to have. I think he's going to be a lot of the drivers of success that LSU is going to have on offense. Because look, there were a lot of people that were really high on Garrett Nussmeier this past season. Brian and I were not one of those people. We were just kind of under the assumption that he was what he was, and what he was a fine college quarterback. I mean,
I think we both had him in the top 10, but it was like near the bottom of the top 10, and he ended up not even being that.
Yeah, he was closer to Zach Mettenberger than what LSU needed him to be that season. I think Sam Leavitt has a little bit more talent, and I like the talent coming in around him. So I have him at number 10. At my number 9 spot, I'm actually staying in the SEC, and I have Gunnar Stockton from Georgia. Now, I know this is a little bit more of a controversial pick to some, but I like Gunnar Stockton, and he showed me some things this past season. We talk a lot about the overall level of talent on Georgia's roster kind of declining year over year, and it's getting farther and farther away than from what it looked like in 21 and 22. But I go back and I look at what Gunnar Stockton did in some of the bigger moments in games last year. At home against Ole Miss, 26 of 31, 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks, 59 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. I look at what he did against Texas at home in that big blowout win. 24 of 29, 229 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick, 29 rushing yards, and then another rushing touchdown. They lost in the playoffs to Ole Miss in that rematch. It was not because of Gunnar Stockton. At least I don't believe that it was. It's the same situation for what it was when they played Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl in the 2024 season. Yeah, it was Gunnar Stockton's first start because Carson Beck got hurt in the SEC championship game, but they didn't lose because of Gunnar Stockton. They lost because Notre Dame that day was just a better team. That's something that we believed as well. Gunnar Stockton has quietly been one of the, I guess, stabilizers of this Georgia program that has otherwise been pretty they're dropping talent. Players are getting arrested left and right. I like what Gunnar Stockton brings to the table. I think he's going to be a big driver of success for the Dogs in 26, so I have him at number 9. At number 8, I have Brendan Sorsby, another transfer portal quarterback, and I love this pickup. As we saw last year, the quarterback dictates a lot of the success, even with a loaded backfield, and they're getting Quentin Joyner back to go along with Cameron Dickey. But the quarterback was the driver of a lot of Texas Tech's success. And depending on how well Baron Morton played is how well Texas Tech played. I also don't think that it's a coincidence that the game that he missed, they lost to an Arizona State team that was just fine last year. And then when Baron Morton came back and he was able to stay healthy, they started performing again. But what happened against Oregon? We talked about it, Brian, when we previewed the game, and we were under the assumption Baron Morton's a good quarterback, not great. Don't know if he's going to do enough to get them over that hump. I think Brendan Sorsby coming over from Cincinnati is that guy. He takes care of the football well. He had 5 picks this past season, and they were concentrated in 3 games. Now, the counter to that is in those 3 games, it was arguably against some of the best competition that he had played. Utah on the road, Arizona at home, and then BYU at home. But he finished with a little bit above a 61% completion percentage, 2,800 passing yards, 27 passing touchdowns, 580 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns to give the Red Raiders offense an element of little bit of a dual threat in there. Not necessarily dual threat, but the ability to make plays with the legs. So I think he's going to be a big driver of success for Texas Tech this upcoming season. So I have Sorsby at 8. Number 7, I have another transfer portal quarterback, and I'm going with Darian Mensah, the transfer from Duke to Miami. Now, I said this to Brian when I dove into his film. I was not aware personally of the game that Darian Mensah had. I think he is a really good quarterback. I think his numbers may inflate his perception a little bit. I don't think that he was the best portal pickup in college football. Like I know over on FanDuel right now, he jumped from having like the 15th best odds to win the Heisman Trophy all the way up to the 4th best odds. I don't know if he's going to have that kind of impact. But I think with that being said, I do think quarterback play is going to take a step up from 25 to 26 for the Hurricanes. Carson Beck was fine, but it was very clear that Miami's offensive coordinator understood what type of quarterback he had. Very veteran, did their best to not put the game on his shoulders, whereas you now have a quarterback where all of Duke's success was Darian Mensah. If he had a bad game, they are just not winning football games. You combine that with Cooper Barcotti that's coming over, Malachi Toney coming in. Obviously, biggest question for them is going to be their offensive line, but I like the Darian Mensah pickup, so I have him at number 7. And then rounding out my 10 through 6, at number 6, I have Byron Brown. And this is a quarterback that not a lot of people are talking about, and it's because he's going to a lukewarm program in Auburn. Auburn's been lukewarm arguably the last decade.
And he came from a G5 team.
Exactly, and he came from USF. I love this pickup, and we talked about him earlier this past offseason, Brian. Byron Brown is a dude. Like that, you want to talk about somebody that has the ability to kind of put the team on his shoulders. He threw for 3,158 yards, completed 66.3% of his passes, 28 touchdown passes, 7 interceptions, 1,008 rushing yards, and 14 rushing touchdowns. I pay attention a lot to how quarterbacks play in the biggest moments. That's a big evaluator for me. When the season opener against Boise State, he played well, completed 66.7% of his passes, 210 yards, no picks, and had 2 rushing touchdowns.
In his best
Against
play of the game, got called back by a penalty.
It did. It
He had
did.
a Tommy Frazier-esque touchdown run of like 50 yards that got called back by a penalty.
Yep.
He broke like 39 tackles on that play, Trev. It was ridiculous.
Nuts, bro. I remember watching that live. I think we were texting about that play.
We were.
Like we were texting about that play. You were like, hey, I don't know if you are or if you have any desire in watching the Boise State game, but turn it on. Mm-hmm. And Byron Brown went absolutely nuts. The following week on the road in the Swamp against Florida, 23 of 36, 263 passing yards, 1 touchdown, no picks, 66 rushing yards. Didn't play the greatest against Miami on the road because he went 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He got sacked quite a bit, but I like some of the supporting cast. I love him rejoining forces with Alex Golesh at Auburn. Look, man, Byron Brown is a sleeper, and some may think that it's a little bit too high, but I'm telling you, I think he's going to be a dude this year. So that's my 10 through 6, Brian.
Yeah, it's good stuff, Trev. I'm gonna dive into my 10 through 6. At 10, I have Gunnar Stockton. So just real quick, couple things. Number one, neither of us will have Trinidad Chambliss on our list. Neither of us have Joey Aguilar on our list because as of right now, their careers are over. They're both obviously fighting to get additional seasons, and if they do, then when we kind of do this ranking again post spring, we'll include them. But just so you guys know, we didn't forget about Trinidad Chambliss. Just as of right now, he's not going to be their starting quarterback because he's not eligible to play. That'll be reflected. He was, I believe, top 5 for both of us. We talked about this, Trev. If he was included, he would have been in the top 5.
Yep.
The other thing for me, this is not a stats-driven ranking. This is not a NFL draft prospects ranking. This is a who will be the most impactful quarterbacks in 2026. Because if it was just about stats, then we're all leading up to announcing Drew Massamaker as our number 1 quarterback in the country. Stats are a part of it, clearly. This is about impact. That's why I had Blake Horvath in my top 10 last year, because it's not just a stats-driven thing. It's about impact. Who are the guys that have the best chance to put a team on their shoulders and carry them? I think Gunnar Stockton is a funky quarterback. He looks funny throwing. He doesn't have like a cannon for an arm. He just doesn't look like a playmaker. He doesn't look like a big-time quarterback when I watch him play, Trev. He just doesn't. He doesn't have that look about him. And then you watch a game, and you're like, there's those games where I've watched him play this year, where I go down at the end, and I'm like, like I don't feel like Gunnar was like blowing me away with like this impressive performance. But then I'm watching the Ole Miss game in the regular season, and I'm like, he doesn't look like he's tearing it up. But then you're like, but he's tearing it up. And you watch him in that game, he goes, when they beat Ole Miss, he goes 26 of 31 for 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. And oh, by the way, adds another 59 rushing yards and a touchdown. And honestly, if you watched the second rematch, their entire game plan was, we're going to not let Gunnar Stockton beat us. I mean, they did a lot to try to throw him out of his game. And so you watch Gunnar, and he just doesn't blow you away. Somebody in the chat said they're not 12-2 without Gunnar Stockton. And I'm like, that's a fact. And I think they mentioned Tennessee, and I forget the other game that the person mentioned, but you're absolutely correct. He shredded Texas this year, shredded Tennessee. I mean, just the I think it was the game-winning touchdown pass. Was that the one that he just dropped over the bucket? Was that the one that gave him the lead or the win at the end of the game? The only concern I have, Trev, of putting him in here is if it's just based on last year, he's a no-brainer top 10 guy. There's just a lot of younger quarterbacks that I see making big jumps, and I don't know how much better Gunnar's going to be because he's a fifth-year senior. But he earned enough this year to say, this kid's going to be a pretty good player. So he's my number 10 on the list. My number 9 is Malik Washington. And I don't know how many of you know about Malik Washington, but if you don't, watch him. This kid has all the talent in the world, Trev. He's young. He's learning. If you look at his past season as a true freshman, now, first of all, this is a big kid. He's like 6'5", 230. He was a true freshman in 2025. There's some things about his game statistically that you really like. He passed for 2,963 yards. He averaged more yards per game this year than CJ Carr did in the regular season. He threw 17 touchdown passes this season. He had 4 rushing touchdowns this season, so accounted for 21 touchdowns. Only had 9 interceptions as a true freshman. Only had 1 game with multiple interceptions, but he also threw the ball a lot. Threw the ball 473 times. They only averaged 6.3 yards per attempt. And so you're like, there's some things about him I like, some things I don't, but he did not have a great supporting cast around him. But when you watch this kid play, Trev, he's a fun watch. I mean, he truly had to carry that offense as a true freshman. I mean, like they went as Malik Washington went as a true freshman. I mean, he was that important to their offense. And he comes out, he completes 57, almost 58% of his passes, throws for almost 3,000 yards. He's got a big arm. He can make any throw. He's a tough kid. I think one thing he needs to learn to do is it's okay to run and be a runner. Like, I know that you want to be a drop back quarterback, but you are pretty athletic too. It's okay to be both. You can be both. And I think he'll learn that as he gets more experience. But he is a really, really talented quarterback, Trev, that's got all the physical tools in order. He's got the physical tools of a future number 1 overall draft pick. Now he's in year 2. He's got to learn to make better decisions. He's got to learn to handle more volume of the playbook, just like a lot of young quarterbacks do. He's got to make better post-snap decisions. He's got to show better timing as a thrower. He's late with a lot of throws that he can still complete because his arm is so strong. So there's a lot of evolution, but I just look, if he just makes normal freshman to sophomore jumps, he's going to be a top 10 quarterback. And that's what I'm calling for. This is he might be one of the 5 most physically gifted quarterbacks coming back in college football this year. Just physical tools. But he's got to put a lot of it together. But there's just enough talent there to make me say, boy, I can't keep this kid out of my top 10. My number 8 quarterback is Demond Williams from Washington. And if you would have a month ago, Trev, I would have had him much higher on my list. Much higher on my list. Because you watch what he did last year, he was exceptional. I mean, 3,065 yards passing, 611 yards rushing, 31 touchdowns, threw 8 picks. He was their offense. You know, like they actually had an early lead against Ohio State because he was making a lot of plays early. And then Ohio State finally was like, okay, we got to stop Demond Williams. And they shut him down in the second half. But he was making some plays with his legs throughout the first half of that game, Trev. And, you know, really showed last year that he can be a legitimate thrower. He had a 161 quarterback rating last year. They asked him to do a lot. He had a couple rough games. He had some bad turnovers against Michigan, had a couple bad turnovers against Oregon, but he had a lot of great moments as well last season. And when you look at the ability to be a dynamic dual threat quarterback in his first year as a full-time starter, kid's very impressive. I mean, he's only started 15 games, Trev, and he's already had, two games of over 300 yards, including a 400-yard game against Rutgers. He's had 254, 298, 275, 280, 257, and that includes a guy that can make plays with his legs. He had a 100-yard rushing game against Rutgers last year as well. He's had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games last year of over 50 yards rushing, in his first year as a starter. So, and they're going to need him to carry it more. Now, here's the thing. He would have been higher on my list had he not gone through what he went through this offseason, what he chose to go through this offseason, where he jumps in the portal and, puts his name in while a bunch of his teammates are at the, wasn't a funeral, but it was a memorial for a student athlete at Washington. There were so many things where he kind of alienated himself from his teammates. He decided to go back. But if I was more confident that he was going to be the unquestioned leader of that football team, I would have probably had him higher on my list. I might have had him top 5. That's how good I think Demond Williams can be. But I'm concerned about all those distractions and how they're going to impact his game. But even with those distractions, he's a top 10 quarterback for me. He's a very, very dynamic player. My number 7 quarterback, Darian Mensah, I think he's going to a great system for him. I do have some concerns about him having to learn a 3rd straight brand new system. Actually, technically, this would be 4th straight new system because he had Willie Fritz as a freshman, right? Then he had John Sumrall. Then he had the Duke offense this past year. Now he's got to learn the Miami offense. So that's a little bit of a concern. He just hasn't been able to make that evolution within a system. But he showed at Duke when he passed for 3,900 yards, he can make a pretty quick transition to the offense. Being able to go to a place that already has Mark Fletcher in the run game, Char Brown in the run game, also has Malachi Tony coming back, but then Cooper Barcotti comes with him, someone he's familiar with. So I think Darian Mensah is going to put up big numbers this year. I also think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's quite like top 3 to 4 like some people are saying. I think he's kind of right in between Carson Beck and Cam Ward. I don't think he's as good as Cam Ward. I think he's better than Carson Beck. I put him right there in the middle. And his arrival in Miami, as honestly as disgusting as it was, the way he went about it, I lost a lot of respect for him, to be completely honest with you, as a young man. But he's still a talented quarterback, and I don't think him going to Miami is going to have any negative impact on how he plays. If anything, it's going to have a positive impact on how he plays. He's going to have a much better supporting cast. So I'm not a huge Darian Mensah fan for what he did this offseason and the way he did it, but boy, he's a talented player, and it's impossible not to have him in your top 10, in my opinion. He's my number 7. And then my number 6, Trev, we have the same number 6. It's Byron Brown. I mean, this is a kid, Trev, he's another one that doesn't look the part always. He's got a little bit of a long, funky throwing motion. He drops the ball way down, and I think that can create some inconsistency as a passer with him. You know, 66.3 completion rate is still pretty good. There's a couple times last year he got into some funks because I think that motion got him out of whack, and it's not always the most repeatable thing, but he still completed 66.3% of his passes. He threw for 3,158 yards, 9.3 yards per attempt, 28 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and he had a 167.06 quarterback rating, which ranks 6th in college football. So as a passer, this young man was an outstanding quarterback last year. We talk about C.J. Carr was 3rd in the country in yards per attempt. Byron Brown was 4th, right behind C.J. at 9.3. So just passing production alone, I think Byron Brown has shown he can be that guy. He goes into the swamp, goes 23 of 36, passes for 263 yards and a touchdown. He throws for 274 and a touchdown against Miami in a game where his team was just completely, overwhelmed. Absolutely brilliant in their win over North Texas on the road, went on the road and had a big win over North Texas. He was outstanding in their loss to Navy. You know, he was really the only reason they were in that game. He threw for 327, 2 touchdowns, finished the year on a very high note against Rice, 16 to 24, 275 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. Passing alone and passing talent alone, 6'3", 230, big arm, production, would have him in the top 10. And then you look at the fact, Trev, that's not all with Byron Brown, because this is also a kid that last year rushed for 1,008 yards and 14 touchdowns. You say, well, you know, that was against G5 talent. True. And he wasn't as impactful with his legs against Miami, but he was against Florida. The reason that I don't have him higher, honestly, Trevor, is because we have seen a lot of quarterbacks that go from the G5 to the Power 4 level. There's a transition period for them. That's honestly what has him even as low as 6. But just impact ability, talent to impact the game. He's a legit runner, but he's not your old school dual threat quarterback that just he can kind of throw enough to allow him to use his legs. This kid can legitimately rip you up with his arm, but then also do damage with his legs. And you put him at Auburn, you know, they lost some guys, but they got some guys coming in. A lot of his receivers from South Florida are coming with him. So there's going to be that knowledge. He's going to a Power 4 team, but he's going to a Power 4 team with his coach. So he'll know the system. And I think that's why I feel very good about putting Byron Brown number 6. If you haven't watched him, folks, go watch this film. And like you said, he had 2 of his biggest plays last year were actually brought back by penalties. There's another one, and I can't remember who it was against, but he had another impressive touchdown run that got called back by a penalty against somebody else. This is a really, really impactful legit dual threat. Like, he's the kind of modern dual threat you want. He's not like I said, he can throw enough to hurt you. This is a legitimate kid that can beat you with his arm and he can beat you with his legs. And he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Yes, he's going up from G5 to P4, but he's also going to be playing with P4 talent this year. And I'm looking forward to watching what Byron Brown does at Auburn.
If you're somebody that's into, fantasy college football, I would look into drafting Byron Brown. Like, that dude is going to score you points, dude. That guy is going to score you points. Let's crack into the top 5 here, Brian, and we'll give 5-4. And my number 5 spot, I have Josh Hoover, the transfer from TCU who's going into Indiana. Now, I had a lot of this was the most debate that I had in my top 5. Who I was going to put at 5 and who I was going to put at 4. Josh Hoover, I would argue between the quarterbacks, because the track record that Indiana has brought in at quarterback, I think speaks for itself. Curtis Rourke had an exceptional season in 2024. Then I don't know if it gets better than what Fernando Mendoza helped the Hoosiers do and go undefeated, go 16-0, win the Heisman Trophy and the national championship. That being said, as far as God-given ability of physical tools as a quarterback, you could argue, and I would argue, that Josh Hoover is the best of the 3. That is a talented kid. I'm very excited to see what he can do in Mike Shanahan's system. But with that being said, there's a little bit more development that you're going to need with Josh Hoover, specifically around taking care of the football. That is my only one concern with him. And that's what made me keep him at 5 instead of moving him up to number 4. You guys know me. I'm very consistent with, I keep track of what quarterbacks do in big games. And in big games, Josh Hoover at TCU had some issues taking care of the football. He had 2 picks on the road against Colorado or against Kansas State. He had 2 picks, no touchdowns on the road against Arizona State. He had 3 picks on the road against Houston, then 2 picks, no touchdown passes on the road against BYU. Here's where I have a lot of confidence in Josh Hoover going to Indiana. He's not going to have to carry that team the same way that he had to carry TCU, where everything was just on his shoulders. I like the pass game weapons that he's going to have. He's going to have a better offensive line, a significantly better offensive line from a talent and from a coaching perspective down in Bloomington. And he's going to have a much better run game, in my opinion. So that is what makes him, in my eyes, a top 5 quarterback. It was hard for me not to move him any higher than that, because some of it is I just have to see the cut down to the turnovers, because that's the one thing that is the outlier between him and when they brought in Fernando Mendoza and Curtis Rourke. In Fernando Mendoza's final year at Cal, he threw 6 interceptions. He also threw 6 interceptions at IU this year, obviously more games. And then Curtis Rourke, I mean, he was going on his 6th year of college football, but the year before he threw 5 interceptions. The year before that, he threw 4 at Indiana in 2024. He threw 4. So if Josh Hoover could cut down on those turnovers, he would be a lot higher on this list for me. But that was the deciding factor between him at 5 and my number 4 quarterback, Julian Sayin. I am obviously not as high on him as what other outlets have been. And that's me saying that, putting him as my number 4 quarterback in my top 10. Just because I don't think he's the number 1 overall quarterback doesn't mean I think that he sucks. There are just some quarterbacks that I believe should be ranked ahead of Julian Sayin. I liked a lot of what he did. He was a very efficient quarterback this past season. You go through and you look at what he did, and he finished the year with a QBR of 88.4. He finished the year with a 77% completion percentage. But again, I evaluate quarterbacks and carry a heavy weight of what they did in their bigger moments. It was week 1 against Texas. We'll give him a bye. I think he was okay against Michigan on the road. Thought he played pretty well, completed 73% of his passes on the road in the snow in the big house. He was not that great against IU in the Big Ten championship game in key moments. And then same thing with Miami. Again, with some of the things with Julian Sayin, you have to go past the stats and the numbers. You do. And I look at performance in big games, and a lot of his success this past season was a byproduct of having Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and Bo Jackson and Brandon Ennis. Now, this year, however, because we are projecting forward, is I think Julian Sayin is going to be a top 5 quarterback in the country, because like CJ Carr, he's going into his next year as a starter. Julian Sayin was only a redshirt freshman. But I'm just not on board with he's the best quarterback in college football and everybody else is second place to Julian Sayin. I'm also not on that trend. I've seen that from PFF, CBS Sports, things like that. But do I think he's a top 5 quarterback? Yeah, I do. Thus, him being at 4. So that's my 5 to 4 line.
Because we're not arguing that he's not good and he shouldn't be in the top 10.
Right.
We're saying he's not top 2 or 3.
Exactly.
And that's where I'm at, Trev. I actually have Julian Sayin number 5. And I actually don't really get too worked up about, how you did in certain big games when you're a redshirt freshman. I think it mattered a whole lot more for me for Josh Hoover, which I'll get to, than it did for Julian Sayin, because Ohio State didn't ask him to carry them against Texas. He just had to make a couple big plays, and he did. And he made some big moment redshirt freshman mistakes last year. And I think he's the kind of kid that will learn from them. He had some other games he didn't play. He didn't do much against Illinois, but they didn't ask him to do a whole lot against Illinois. And he's going to be asked to do a lot more. And that's why I don't put him on the same level as CJ Carr, because even though CJ Carr had a Jeremiah Love, and you still needed him to be much more of a big part of your offense than you needed than Julian Sayin did. And when they then tried to ramp him up in the postseason, it didn't work. He put up some yards because he made some big plays down the field, but he couldn't make those big moment throws. I put that more on Ryan Day and Brian Hartline than I do Julian Sayin. They should have given him more chances to kind of early in games make some of those big play moments so he'd be better prepared for them in the postseason. But, I mean, we're splitting hairs with some of these picks. If you have a guy in the top 10 this year, you think he's really good.
Yeah.
And so to me, I do think Julian's getting a little bit too much hype, but I think, or not too much hype. He's being ranked a little too high for me because I think the hype is justified. I mean, it's a redshirt freshman that completed. I mean, he was closer to 80% completion than he was 70%.
77%.
I don't care how conservative your offense is. When you're a power 4 quarterback completing 77% of your passes, you're pretty flipping good. For some context, he led the nation in quarterback completion percentage at 77. The next closest guy was Carson Beck at 72.4. I mean, that's not even close, Trev, to his 77%. So I think Julian's a very efficient game manager. I think in year 2, however, what we're going to see from Julian is they're going to let him do more with his legs. If Arthur Smith does with Ohio State what he did in the NFL, will we not see more play action? Will we not see more movement throws? Will we not see more chances for him to not only get the ball down the field, but then also to tuck it and run if things aren't there? What I hope that Ohio State does is let Julian be a little bit more of a playmaker in the regular season, so that way the first time you're not asking him to do that is in the postseason. That's my hope, because he's still going to have talent around, big-time talent around him. And so I think he's a guy that I want to see Ohio State let him loose a little bit more this year. Let him be a playmaker, because he's a very different type of quarterback than you've had in some years. And I think he doesn't have like a cannon for an arm, but he can get the ball down the field with something to it a little bit. But I think they didn't do enough to use his legs last year. That's my thing, Trev. When you looked at his stats last year, and you see that he rushed for minus 44 yards and no touchdowns, that kid's way too athletic to be putting up those kind of numbers. That's something I'd like to see Ohio State do a little bit different with him. If they do that, then I could see him moving up this list. Because here's one thing that everybody above him did is use their legs more often than he did. And the reason you can make a case for guys like Byron Brown and Darian Mensah, well, not Darian Mensah as much. He's a pretty good athlete, but he doesn't like to use his legs. But a Byron Brown for sure, Malik Washington, is because those guys can hurt you in different ways. I think Julian has the talent to do so. They just got to let him do it. With Josh Hoover, I absolutely love that pickup, Trev. Look, I had Josh Hoover in my top 10 last year. It should not come as a shock that now that he's on a better team than I have him in my top 10 this year. You know, you talked about some of the games he struggled in, and if you watch those games, I don't know that he struggled as much as his offensive line and talent around him struggled. He was not good against BYU. I think he played very well against Houston. The game he threw 3 picks. He kind of had to make some plays to get them in there, and he just a couple times went to the well one too many times and made some bad throws. But outside of the 3 picks, he went 24 of 33 for 293 yards and 2 touchdowns, average 8.9 yards per attempt. You know, you look at what he did against K-State. Yeah, he threw 2 picks. He also passed for 376 yards in that game. And he was very good against SMU, ripped SMU apart, threw for 379 yards and 5 touchdowns. That was a big game too. And so we've seen him in some big games have some struggles, and we've seen him in some big games be great. Or, you know, remember the year before TCU went and got beat by SMU, but he threw for 396 yards and 3 touchdowns. You know, I thought he's had some very good moments, but the problem is, Trevor, is when he throws picks, he tends to throw them in bunches. He had 4 games in 2024 of multiple turnovers and interception. He had 5 games in 2025 of multiple turnovers. If he throws 12 picks next year, I'm fine with that, because he also is a bit of a gunslinger. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to take some chances that I don't know that Fernando Mendoza would have taken. But you can't be like none against the 3 non-conference and then like 3 against Oregon. You know, it can't be 2, 2, 2, 0, 0, 3, 0, 0 against bad teams and 2 again. You know what I mean? That's what he has to avoid. And I think part of the reason I rank him fourth is he knew he had to kind of carry TCU. The one thing that Indiana did a brilliant job with, they just had the Heisman Trophy winner, and they never asked him to carry him in big moments. They'd ask him to make some big moment throws, and he did. But they didn't ask him to carry the offense against Ohio State. Like, could you imagine, Trev, TCU going into a game, a big game, where, conference championships on the rival, you got Josh Hoover quarterback, and he goes out there and in that conference championship game, only attempts 23 passes, only throws for 222 yards and 1 touchdown. You'd be like, they have no chance at winning. They're going to get annihilated. Well, that's exactly what Fernando Mendoza did in the Big Ten title game. Fernando Mendoza did not throw for over 200 yards once in the postseason playoff game. Not once. Because they didn't need him to. Josh Hoover never had that chance. If he didn't get to 250 yards, they had very little chance of winning against a good team. So I think that's going to help him a ton as well. But he's got some gunslinger to him, Trev, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm a big Josh Hoover guy. I don't know how much of an NFL prospect he is, but for a college football player, you put the talent around him that he's going to have, I think he's going to be lights out this season. And we have them both 4-5. We just have them flipped.
Yeah.
I have no debate with your thoughts on Josh Hoover. You have no debate on my thoughts of Julian Sain. I think we're on the same page. It's just, what do you value? And the argument that I would make against my ranking is there's a greater chance that Julian Sain not only improves this year because of the system and the players around him, but because he's young, he's gaining more experience. Josh Hoover's just going to benefit from a year in a better system with better talent around him. He is what he is as the quarterback. Where Julian and a lot of these guys in this list are going to keep getting better and better and better. So if I'm wrong on Julian Sain, if you and I are wrong, it'll be because he's in the top 3, not because he falls back and he's 10th, 11th,
Agreed.
12th, 13th.
Yep. Agreed there completely. Brian, you and I have the same 3, 2, and 1, so we can kind of attack these both together. So at number 3, we both have Arch Manning, quarterback from Texas. And this is somebody that, Brian, look, in the preseason, we kind of called what his evolution was going to be in 2025. There was way too much hype being placed on him to where if Texas didn't go some sort of 15 or 16-0 and Arch won the Heisman and they won the national championship, people were going to write him off as a bust. And we're starting to see a little bit of that. Arch is kind of starting to become an afterthought with guys like Julian Sain rising and Darian Mensah going to Miami and CJ Carr rising, Julian Sain rising. Arch Manning finished the season on an exceptional note. He started to find his footing, and then when he found his groove, he really started to take off. So I don't want to take too much meat off of the bone here, Brian, but we both have Arch Manning here. I think he's poised for a really big season, especially for what comes back around him.
I think the thing with Arch, Trev, is as you said, there was too much asked of him early on as a first-time starter, and he struggled. I mean, there's no denying that. But take away the expectations, take all the else. You're talking about an SEC quarterback that in his first year as a starter passed for 3,163 yards, rushed for 399 yards, accounted for 37 touchdowns because he also caught a touchdown pass, and led his team to victories over 4 ranked opponents, including 2 playoff teams. One was at home, one was on a neutral field. If his last name wasn't Manning, we'd be talking about how great of a first-year starter he had. But we also said Arch needs time. He needs time to develop his game. He needs time to grow into this position, and that's exactly what happened. He was terrible the first 3 games, Trev. Terrible. And he was okay against Sam Houston State. They're a bad team. He wasn't very good against Florida. Against Oklahoma, running, I think his biggest impact that game was kind of as a scrambler. They won because of their defense. They won 23-6, had a punt return for a touchdown. Kentucky, he was bad. Second, and then he was pretty bad the first half against Mississippi State. He woke up in the second half of the game, and I feel like, we talk about having that the light comes on moment. That second half against Mississippi State, I think, was a light came on for Arch Manning. He just stopped. You know why? Because they were getting beat bad. They were down, 3 scores? I think at one point in time in that game. And Arch was just like, dude, what I got to lose? Just go play ball, man. Like just let her rip. And he ripped Mississippi State up. And he came out the next week, and you just saw him in the first half against Vanderbilt. Like, dude, this is a different kid mentally. Like, when you watch him play against Vandy, like, it was a different kid mentally. Even against Georgia, I thought Arch battled. The rest of his team was outmatched. His offensive line was terrible. Arch competed his tail off in that game. And I just felt like that second half against Mississippi State was sort of the lights going on moment. And then you looked at the A&M game, and A&M was doing a lot of things to kind of confuse him mentally. He had some drops by his receivers. He wasn't on his game as a thrower, but look what he did with his legs. And this is what I like about Arch, is if he's off as a thrower, he can still go make big plays as a runner. Had 53 yards rushing at a touchdown. I think it was the touchdown that put him ahead late. I think it was him just stepping in the pocket and taking off right up the middle. Might not have been the one that put him ahead, but it was one of the second half touchdowns that helped him win that football game. And by the end of the season, Arch was pretty good. Yeah, I know Michigan was a beat up football team, but I don't care who you're playing, man. You know, when you pass for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns and run for 155 yards and 2 more touchdowns, you're a pretty darn good football player. I think when you look at the talent around him, the offensive line remains a question mark, but they upgraded at running back this offseason through the portal. They upgraded at wide receiver through the portal. Now, the big key for Arch is going to come down to, can the offensive line protect him? That's going to be the big question. But if they can, I'm a big fan of what Arch is growing into. The opportunity was always there for him. He was never the elite, like, number one player in the country that people made him out to be. But he also wasn't the overrated quarterback that others made him out to be, because it sells also. He was always a kid with some talent that needed time to grow, because he wasn't the technical assassin that his one uncle is. He was more of the gunslinger that his other uncle is. We've said this before, Trev, and somebody in the chat just said it. He's more Eli than he is Peyton.
Oh, absolutely.
And you just got to accept that. But Peyton won 2 Super Bowls, and Eli won 2 Super Bowls, doing it very differently. And Archie was different than both of them, but he's more like Uncle Eli and Grandpa Archie than he is Peyton. And I think people were thinking he was going to be Peyton, and that's not Arch's game. And I think he's grown into his own, and I think he's going to have a really good year this year for Texas. I'm a big fan. And then number 2, Trev, CJ Carr of Notre Dame. We talked a lot about him beginning the show. CJ is an elite talent. He's got elite arm talent. He's a quality athlete. He showed last year he can use his legs to move the chains, score the occasional touchdown. You're not going to design game plans to let his legs beat you, nor are you going to have to necessarily game plan to not let his legs beat you. But he can do those type of things. But when you look at CJ Carr, elite arm talent, production's going to be there this season. The production was there last year. Top 5 in passer rating, top 5 in QBR, yards per attempt last season. I think if I'm wrong about CJ Carr being number 2, it's because he's going to be number 1. And we'll get into kind of why we have CJ Carr number 2. But this was a tough decision to me. Like, it was very clear who number 3 was. It was not very clear who number 1 and number 2 were. And when it came down to it, there's a lot of reasons why. I think that what we saw last year was Dante Moore had to carry that football team with all the receivers at injury. We have yet to see CJ Carr have to carry a football team. That's the only difference for me right now between CJ and Dante, is Dante had to carry that team, and it got him to the playoffs. CJ has not done that yet. He will this year. And that's why I have CJ Carr number 2. He's an elite player. There's no doubt about it.
We share the same sentiment about CJ Carr and Dante Moore, who obviously is our number 1 quarterback that we have up on this list. And that was the difference. We talked about earlier CJ Carr and Notre Dame struggling on the road against Boston College. Who bailed him out of that game? CJ put on a good performance, don't get me wrong. But who started to put that game? It was Jeremiah Love's 94-yard touchdown run backed up on the 6-yard line. Whereas I go and I look at what Dante Moore did on the road against Oregon. His overall stat line will not blow you away. But that game-winning drive to put them into field goal range without DeCorian Moore, without Gary Bryant, I believe they're tied at Kenyon Sadiq, I think, was out that game
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. for him to engineer that type of drive with a bunch of third and fourth string guys that were just not that experienced and have to carry them and put the team on his shoulders like that. It's just one of those where it's like, I watched Dante Moore do it. I have faith that CJ Carr can do it. I just have yet to see him. And I'm always going to take the concrete versus the projection. But like Brian said, if I'm wrong, if he's wrong, it's because CJ Carr should have been first. And I'm sure, Brian, that wouldn't surprise either of us.
No, it's and honestly, was some of this because I'm like, can I really put CJ number one? Is that going to come? You know what I mean? Like, I did think about that, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, it really does come down to these are two elite talents. The only difference is I think they're both going to also have really good supporting cast this year, really good defenses, really good skill players around them. It really does come down to, we've seen Dante, as you said, as I just said, we've seen him have to carry that football team. Now, at times, Dante didn't handle himself in some of those moments. I thought Dante really struggled against Indiana early, but then he finally figured it out and he ended up playing okay. But he looked pretty good against Texas Tech at times, and he looked pretty good against James Madison. I thought he was great out-dueling Damon Williams. I thought he completely outdueled Jaden Maeva last year. And you talk about the game in the rain, and Dante barely passes for 100 yards and pouring down rain, but then he had to use his legs. Had some big runs in that game as well. Just watch how poised he was. He struggled early against Penn State on the road, struggled. But then watch him settle in the second half and lead that team back from, weren't they down 17-0? Or no, they were up 17-0. But Penn State makes this wild comeback, and then watching Dante just settle him in and go make plays with his arm, go make plays with his legs. He's just had to show more than CJ has so far. And the things that people say, oh, well, Dante struggled here and there. You mean in a playoff game while CJ Carr was sitting at home and didn't have to show himself in those games? We don't know how CJ would have played in the playoff game. And if you're someone who doesn't like Dante, right? Oh, well, I don't like Dante. That's fine. Then you're going to look for every negative thing that he did wrong. And he played terrible against Indiana. But he played on a stage that we haven't seen CJ Carr play in. Do I think that CJ Carr can lead Notre Dame to multiple playoff wins? Yes, I do. Have we seen him do that yet? No, we haven't. We have with Dante. And when you're splitting hairs between two very talented passers whose games are very similar, Trev, like they're very similar quarterbacks, great arm talent, got some gunslinger to him. I think the other thing is because Dante was older, we've seen Dante do more trying to fit that sucker in over the middle. Dante attacks over the middle more than CJ does. And that's an area where I want to see CJ improve. Dante will sling that sucker over the middle on a dig route, where CJ tends to take his chances in one-on-ones on the outside. And that's a part of CJ's evolution that I want to see. If he gets to that point, then he'll be number one. So that's why right now I have Dante Moore as my number one quarterback in the country. It's why Trev has Dante Moore as the number one quarterback in the country. It was kind of like this, Trev. 1 through 6 for me was a no-brainer. There was separation between 6 and 7. There was separation between 6 and then 4 and 5. 4 and 5 were about the same, but you had to split hairs. There was a very clear number 3 who I thought was significantly ahead of 4 and 5. And then there was distance between 1 and 2, and 1 and 2 is splitting hairs. So it just speaks to how good quarterback is this year. And just look at some of the names not on this list. You had Brendan Sorsby. I didn't. You had Sam Levitt. I didn't. Here's guys that we both did not have on the list. Devin Dampier, who threw for 2,490 yards, 835 yards rushing, and 34 touchdowns, only 5 picks. Drew Mestamaker, who threw for over 4,000 yards and 34 touchdowns last year. We don't have him on the list. The quarterback, the freshman from Cal, who as a true freshman passed for 3,454 yards and 18 touchdowns as a true freshman, is not on the list. CJ Bailey, who everybody knows I'm a big fan of, not on the list. Kevin Jennings, not on the list. Bear Bachmeier, not on the list. Connor Wegman, last year, passed for 2,705 yards, rushed for 700 yards in the Big 12, passed for 25 touchdowns, rushed for 11 touchdowns last season. Heck of a year in the Big 12 to lead them to a top 25 finish. No Avery Johnson, no Noah Fafita, no Mason Heitschel, no Jade Maeva, no Bryce Underwood, no Rocco Becht, no Lenora Sellers, no John Mateer, and no Marcel Reed. Those are all really good quarterbacks.
Yeah.
That 10 to if we took a top 10 of guys not on that list, it's more impressive to me than the top 10 we had last year.
100%. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because if I remember correctly, in our top 10 list last year, at least for mine, I didn't have CJ Carr. And if I did, it was near the bottom because we just didn't know. He was a redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I had him.
I don't know if you did or didn't. I mean, we didn't know who the starting quarterback was going to be this time.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So I don't think we had CJ Carr. I did not have Julian Sayin. I didn't have Josh Huber. I didn't have Byron Brown. Didn't have Darian Mensah. I mean, I think I had Sam Levitt at 10 last year because I was like, he's going into year 2 at Arizona State. Obviously, we know how that panned out. But yeah, man, this top 10 list is exceptional, especially compared to last year. A lot of names were left off.
A lot of names. There's a lot of good quarterbacks. And like normally Trev and I'll debate a little bit. I think the only guy that I said, hey, watch him again is Malik Washington. But like Brendan Sorsby, I'm like, dude, I had a hard time not putting Brendan Sorsby on there. I had a very hard time. I had a very hard time not having Devin Dampier on there, Drew Mestamaker on there, CJ Bailey on there. Jaden Maeva for USC. I mean, I have no problem leaving him off, but like there's a lot of years where a guy that passed for 3,700 yards and had 30 combined touchdowns at USC would have been on this list. But when you're separating last year, when you're separating really good quarterbacks, it's like you got to draw the line somewhere. Noah Fafita had a heck of a year last year for Arizona, leading them to a top 25 finish. So, and there's some really talented young quarterbacks that I like. We don't have Colton Joseph on here, who was a guy that passed for 2,624 yards and rushed for over 1,000 yards last season and had over 30 touchdowns. Like how's he going to be this year? Can't justify putting him on my top 10, but I'm gonna mention him. Could John Mateer end up being a top 10 quarterback? He has a chance. I have a hard time putting a guy that had 14 touchdowns and 11 picks on my list, but we also believe that a lot of that had to do with the injured hand that he had early in the year. What kind of quarterback will he be this year? With a very good supporting cast. We both talked about how much we like the portal pickups they got at receiver. We think their offensive line is going to be better. We think they're going to be be able to run the football better, and then his hand will be healthy. So there's so many talented quarterbacks. Marcel Reed has a beef to be on here. There's so many quarterbacks. Trev, it's such a loaded year. And I'll tell you, 2 leagues that are absolutely just insanely loaded at quarterback is the Big 10 and the Big 12.
Yeah, bro. Like
the Big 12, here's the list of quarterbacks in the Big 12. Should be Arch Manning, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Texas is still in the Big 12. But I've got in the Big 12, I've got Brendan Sorsby, Devin Dampier, Drew Mestamaker. You've got Bear Bachmeier, Connor Wegman, Avery Johnson, Noah Fafita, Cutter Boley, who's going to have a really good receiving group to throw to this year, and Juju Lewis, a former 5-star commit at Colorado who took over last year and in limited time threw for 589 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no picks. The Big 10 this year has not only Dante Moore, not only Josh Hoover, Julian Sayin, who we talked about, Malik Washington, but also the Big 10 has Jaden Maeva, Bryce Underwood, Drake Lindsay, Aiden Childs this year, Nico Iamaleava. They have Rocco Becht, Dylan Lonergan transferred into the league. I think he's going to do well at Rutgers. And then Colton Joseph, the kid we talked about. And so those 2 leagues are incredibly deep. I didn't mention DJ Lagway for Baylor, but DJ Lagway has no business being in the conversation for top 10 quarterbacks in the country. But he's just another talented kid in the Big 12. He's talented. Those 2 leagues especially are absolutely loaded. And you want to know one of the reasons why the ACC is not as good as the other leagues? There's some really good quarterbacks at the top. Obviously, we have Darian Mensah in the conversation. He's in that top 10 list. We have, and I forgot about Damon Williams is also in the Big 10 because I keep forgetting that Washington's in the Big 10. But, CJ Bailey we both like. The kid from Cal is a good player. Kevin Jennings is a good player. And then after that, it's what? It's Mason Heitschel, and then a lot of not great. that's one of the things that separates. And I think the SEC has a little bit of a quarterback problem as well. There's some very good quarterbacks in the SEC, but there's also a lot of guys you're like, in the SEC as well. The SEC's got to continue to get better at quarterback. They're getting there. The ACC's got to figure out how to recruit and develop quarterbacks better than they have. There's a big difference between when you look at the quarterback play in the Big 10 and the Big 12 and even the SEC, because the top of the SEC is better than the 1 through 5 in the ACC. There's a big difference in those two leagues as far as just top-end talent, but even more so depth of talent at quarterback. I mean, it's like everybody in the Big 12 outside of like Iowa State has some kid coming back that's got some talent or some kid coming in that's got some talent. And I think that's one of the things that makes the Big 10 and the Big 12 better leagues than what the ACC is right now. It's quarterback play is a big part of that right now, Trev.
I mean, think about this, and I'll just use my list as an example here because it's kind of the only one that I remember from last year's. But in my list last year, I had DJ Lagway ranked and Lenora Sellers as an honorable mention, and we didn't really even talk about them today. I know we didn't talk about Lenora Sellers, and if we made a top 25, I would argue that DJ Lagway probably wouldn't be in my top 25 of quarterbacks this year.
He's not in my top 7 or 8 of the Big 12.
But that's exactly. And I think that speaks to the level of growth of quarterback play in college football, that a player with that much raw talent, if this was last year, but DJ Lagway had the season we had, we would have conversations like, we'll see what he can do. And go into the Big 12, a little bit more quarterback friendly league, air it out a little bit more. Maybe he'll develop down at Baylor. Who knows? And Lord knows Art Briles is going to need him to do that as well. But a lot of things who's the head coach at Baylor?
Dave Aranda.
Dave Aranda.
Art Briles is the OC. That'd be amazing.
No, I don't know really where I got that name from.
Yeah. No, because you're thinking great quarterback play at Baylor, and what's the first thing you think of? You think of Art Briles.
Yeah.
I get that.
Well, I guess DJ Lagway would have actually really liked to have Art Briles.
He would have been but like Trevin, there's a lot of young quarterbacks that we need to talk about too. That how are they going to be? How's Matt Zoller going to be at Missouri? How's Ethan Grunkmeyer going to be at Virginia Tech? Like that's the other thing too is there's a lot of talented young quarterbacks that Drake Lindsay at Minnesota is a guy that I'm very high on. I have zero chance of pronouncing his name. The kid from Michigan State. There's some talented young quarterbacks also that I'm very much looking forward to seeing kind of how they develop. So that's what's, I think, going to make this year so fun is it's going to be a very, very deep year. Somebody in the chat just mentioned Aaron Philo at Georgia. We couldn't even consider putting him on the list because he's never really started many real games. But he's a talented kid who's going to have a chance. But that's what the SEC's banking on. They're banking on a bunch of kids like that this year to kind of take them to the next level. But I do think you've got better developers of quarterback in the SEC now than you did a couple years ago. I really believe that. And I think something that's going to help the league. But it's such a great year at quarterback, Trev. Such a great year at quarterback. And that's what's partly why I'm looking forward to this season. But then also you look at and say Notre Dame is going to have one of the best, if not the best. And that also as a Notre Dame fan should get you excited. But I think you guys get a sense of this is why we say it can't just be the CJ Carr show. He's going to need a supporting cast around him to help lead him to victory. Because I do believe this is going to be a lot like it was in 2018, a lot like it was in 2019, a lot like it was in 2020, where the quarterbacks kind of somewhat neutralize each other a little bit. It's going to be about what supporting cast plays better. And, it's going to, but it is nice knowing that Notre Dame has a quarterback that has the talent to get on that stage and compete. Like they're not taking a backseat to anybody when it comes to quarterback talent, and quarterback play, especially as a thrower.
Agreed 100%. Can't tell you the last time Notre Dame went into an offseason where I could confidently say they have a top 3 quarterback in college football, not third.
Riley was a clear top 10 guy coming from Duke. Clear top 10 guy. Top 3? Nope. He was the perfect fit for them that year, but top 3? No. And if he was going to be top 3, it was going to primarily because of his running ability.
Yep.
Not his throwing ability. And that's the difference. When was the last time Notre Dame had a top 3 quarterback, period? 2009?
Yeah.
Before that, you got to go back to 2006, 2005.
Yeah. And it's 2009 because of how the season played out. I don't know. We probably would have, but I don't know based off of what he did in his sophomore year in 2008 if many outlets would have had Jimmy Clausen as a top 5 quarterback going into 2009. I mean, yeah, it's definitely. I mean, so the next one solidified would probably be Quinn from 05 to 06.
Like going into the season, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about, but definitely a good spot to be in, Brian. Definitely a good spot.